In this series, and exclusive to this channel, you'll hear a word-for-word account of what the jury were told after hearing 9 months of evidence during Lucy Letby's original trial. Now, with so much harmful misinformation currently being spread online and in mainstream publications surrounding this case, this series seeks to provide for the first time exactly what transpired in court. That means no ill-informed commentary or any bias, simply the evidence as presented during the trial itself. This video has been made possible by the purchasing of court-approved transcripts, further details of which can be found in the video description box below. What you'll hear next is a detailed summary of the prosecution's case against Lucy Letby. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. We now move on to the second event, the event at 3:20 hours on the 13th of October. This is what I'll call seeing in the dark, and you know what I mean. So far as this event was concerned, we heard from Ashley Hudson on Friday the 27th of January. Nurse Hudson had looked after Child I for several times before the night shift of the 12th to the 13th. She ran through the documents explaining to us that Child I was prospering. The level of monitoring which had been in place had been scaled right back, and you'll remember her taking us through the observation charts behind divider 12. Child I was so well that the probe that monitored her heart, her SATs and respiration rates had been removed from the beginning of the morning shift on October 11th. On October 13th, there's a feeding chart showing that Child I had 55 ml via bottle or from a bottle at 01:30. Nurse Hudson took us through her nursing notes for the shift. They recorded that Child I had been breathing for herself in air, was alert, and critically we say, was demanding feeds. So this is the first part of the night shift of the 12th into the 13th. And so far as Child I being pale was concerned, Nurse Hudson told us that was entirely normal for Child I. Child I's collapse in the early hours, we were told, was a much more serious event than what had happened on September 30th. Ashley Hudson remembered that Child I was still in nursery 2, and she, Ashley Hudson, was her designated nurse. Before Child I collapsed, she had been in good clinical condition, behaving appropriately for her age and appearing very stable. The fact that she was waking and queuing for feeds was really encouraging, and it was expected that she was coming up for discharge for going home from the neonatal unit within a couple of weeks. If we can go to tile 31, please, we can see the population distribution. Ashley Hudson had left nursery 2 because she had been called to assist Laura Eagles with a procedure in nursery 1. You can see that Lucy Letby had a single child on this shift, and that child was in nursery 1. Ashley Hudson said that she asked one of her colleagues to watch Child I. She couldn't remember who it was she had asked, but there were 2 candidates who'd been by the desk at the time. She said they were Caroline Oakley and Lucy Letby. Well, Caroline Oakley was the shift leader, and her statement was read to you. She had no recollection of being asked to monitor Child I. Looking at tile 31, we suggest, knowing what you now know of how things operated in that unit, it is obvious who would have been the ideal candidate to have kept an eye on Child I. In effect, Lucy Letby and Ashley Hudson swapped places, didn't they? It's obvious. Although Ashley Hudson recalled being away helping Laura Eagles for about 15 minutes in nursery 1 and became aware there was an issue after she came back into nursery 2. She had been in the milk room, said Ashley Hudson, having left nursery 1. Child I wasn't due a feed at the time, but some milk needed defrosting in preparation for Child I's feed. When she got back to nursery 2, there was no one, or no adults at least, in the room, and she started, do you remember? There's a desk by the window that leads from the corridor to the nursery. Ashley Hudson started to prepare Child I's milk with her back to Child I, who was clearly behind her. The next thing that Ashley Hudson remembered was the appearance of Lucy Letby in the doorway, and Lucy Letby pointed out that Child I looked pale. Lucy Letby was apparently about 5 or 6 feet away from the cot at the time, and do you remember Ashley Hudson sat in the witness box, and she pointed to the court clerk and gave that as being the approximate distance that Lucy Letby would have been from Child I. Lucy Letby said something along the lines of, "Don't you think Child I looks pale?" According to Ashley Hudson, the lighting in the nursery was low. The main light was off, but the corridor light was on, so you could see to do things in the room. And you'll remember, I'm sure, what Lucy Letby said about this in interview. At the very bottom of page 42, this question. And you were stood at the doorway and the lights in the nursery were off. Do you agree with that? She replied, yeah. And further down, do you therefore agree that it wouldn't be possible to see if child eye was pale? She replied, no, because there's still an element of light in the window coming from the doorway, and child eye's cot was positioned by the window. The police then went on to ask questions about that tent structure. Do you remember it being explained to us that would have been over child eye for the very purpose of shielding her from the light, ironically? Well, according to Ashley Hudson, child eye had a blanket over her, this tent structure, and nesting around her. This is to keep her secure as a premature baby. Ashley Hudson, who was actually in the room, couldn't see child eye because of the canopy and the lighting. At this point, she was closer to child eye than Lucy Letby, and Lucy Letby therefore did not have a better view. Ashley Hudson switched on the light, pulled back the canopy and went to help child eye, realising immediately that she was in a very poor condition. She described her as incredibly pale in colour, almost white, had not responded to the blankets being pulled back, was hypertonic, which means floppy, and was gasping agonal breaths, dying breaths. Ashley Hudson's first thought was that child eye had deteriorated so rapidly that she, Ashley Hudson, was too late to save her. And she described child eye's deterioration as, quote, quite remarkable. That's Ashley Hudson. At the conclusion of her evidence, Nurse Hudson said that she'd been in the same position in which Lucy Letby was standing when Lucy Letby said that child eye looked pale. And Ashley Hudson has told you that you cannot see a child in child eye's position from the position that Lucy Letby was in. And do you remember, a photograph was produced in which an effort had been made to recreate the view and the lighting at the time? Well, Ashley Hudson couldn't see, neither we say could Lucy Letby. And again, we have a head-on credibility conflict, don't we? It's a bit like the mother of child E and F with child E. Two witnesses whose accounts don't live in the same world. And we asked Lucy Letby about this when she gave evidence, didn't we? You'll remember her reaction when she was asked whether going from an illuminated corridor into the darkened nursery too was something which would have improved her ability to see. And you knew the answer. She knew the answer. But her first answer was, I don't know. Then she conceded that it would have meant that she would not have been able to see as well, and yet she persisted in saying that she could see child eye. Then we had a break. It was an afternoon session. And when we came back, I asked Lucy Letby about what she had said in interview at page 34. What she said in interview was this: maybe I spotted something that Ashley wasn't able to spot. The rooms are never that dark that you wouldn't be able to see a baby at all. There's always a level of light for that reason. And I asked her the following questions and got the following answers. You don't have better eyesight than Ashley, do you? She replied, no. At page 35 over the page, you are putting all this down to your greater experience. Is that right? She replied, no. I then said, well, the question is, how would you be able to spot the colouring then that Ashley couldn't if you were both stood at the same place? And your answer? And she said, I had more experience, so I knew what I was looking for, or looking at. Let's go to the third of your interviews. This is the interview on the 11th of June 2019. This is the officer speaking to you. How could you see from the doorway that child eye was pale without having the light on, Lucy? How did you know she was pale? And you said what? Maybe I spotted something that Ashley wasn't able to spot. The rooms are never that dark that you would not be able to see the baby at all. There's always a level of light for that reason. You don't have better eyesight than Ashley, do you? No. At page 35, over the page, you are putting all this down to your greater experience. Is that right? No. Well, the question is, how would you be able to spot the colouring then that Ashley couldn't if you were both stood at the same place? And your answer? That I had more experience, so I knew what I was looking for. Or looking at. Knew what you were looking for? What did you mean by that? Your answer? You explain it. Yeah, I don't mean it like that. I'm finding it quite hard to concentrate on all of the dates in a minute. You will remember the way, I'm not trying to reproduce it because your memory is the best evidence. You'll remember the way she corrected herself at that point, and I said, "Oh, you knew what you were looking for. What did you mean by that?" We had a very long pause, didn't we? A very long pause. I then broke the silence by saying, "Your answer, you explain it." And she knew what she had done, didn't she, Lucy Letby? And she said, "Yeah, I didn't mean it like that. I'm finding it quite hard to concentrate on all the dates at the moment." All the dates. Dates had nothing to do with what was being asked about here, did it, ladies and gentlemen? You saw Lucy Letby give that evidence. You heard what she said. Did she make an innocent mistake? Or did something else slip out? Under the pressure of the witness box, did something else just slip out? We say that on that night, the reason she knew Child I was in extremis was because she had caused the problem. And the reason she said what she said in the witness box was the same. Well, you have this, what I have called the credibility contest between Ashley Hudson and Lucy Letby. Taking that evidence into account, you can decide where the truth lies. Because there was no other indication for what had happened, Child I's anemia was treated with a blood transfusion, and you heard that the warning signs for anemia are dips in oxygen saturations, changes in breathing pattern, temperature stability, or the child is lethargic. And during that shift, before this crisis, Child I had displayed none of those symptoms at all, nor in the preceding shifts other than a very slight variation in temperature. Because Child I's collapse was nothing to do with anemia. As Dr. Neem and Dr. Newby told you, following 3 doses of adrenaline and CPR, Child I recovered, became pink and vigorous. Yet another miraculous recovery. Shades of Child H, and what I was reminding you of at the end of the day yesterday. Lucy Letby's nursing note is at tile 47. Lucy Letby put a bit of thought into this one. She timed her view as having been 2 minutes before Ashley Hudson, and she said that she had seen events at 3:20 in this note, made at 7:59. When Lucy Letby wrote this note, she would have been able to see Ashley Hudson's note, because the time at which Ashley Hudson wrote her note was earlier at 5:04. So why did Lucy Letby time her view earlier than Ashley Hudson's? The answer is, she was making the point that it was she who'd been able to see Child I's decline first. She also knew by this stage that Ashley had named her in the records as having been the person who saw things first. Do you think Lucy Letby would have written this note in those terms if Ashley Hudson hadn't made a note in the records before she made her note? It would have been another plausibly deniable one, wouldn't it otherwise, if Ashley Hudson hadn't thought to write down Lucy Letby's name. Professor Arthurs reviewed a radiograph taken at 4:25, so after the collapse. He said that in this one, the stomach was not particularly distended, but the large bowel was. And he noted that the nasogastric tube was curled up in the esophagus rather than being in the stomach. That's an interesting coincidence, isn't it? That the NGT, which of course would drain the stomach if there was air in there after an incident like this, just happened to have ended up curled up in the esophagus. Dr. Evans told us that in his view, the only reasonable explanation for this collapse was that someone injected air into Child I's stomach. And as part of the cross-examination, it was pointed out to Dr. Evans that there was nothing in the records to suggest that Child I had a nasogastric tube at this stage. But we also know from Dr. Bowen's evidence that to an experienced nurse, getting a nasogastric tube in and out is the work of a couple of seconds, apparently, very quick. Dr. Bowen was of the view that Child I was sabotaged by air down the nasogastric tube and air into the intravenous line. Dr. Bowen thought that the appearance in the X-ray, taken at 4:25, were indicative of air having been put down the nasogastric tube. And I've just reminded you of what Professor Arthur said, and indeed a radiologist's report that accompanies that particular image, speaks of, quote, marked gaseous distension of bowel loops. The note goes on to say, you will see, clinical information regarding the outcome of the previous episode of bowel distension would be helpful in interpretation of the current image as the appearance is similar. Splinting of the diaphragm due to bowel distension with moderately severe bowel distension. So the radiologist was making a connection between this incident and that incident. The reality is, we say, there was no innocent reason for child I's extreme and life-threatening collapse. There was no illness. There was no significant physical infirmity. And the circumstances in which Lucy Letby appears to have been able to see something, which you can be sure of the evidence of Ashley Hudson she simply would not have been able to see, coupled with the fact that she must have been the person who substituted for Ashley Hudson, coupled with the way she explained all this to you in evidence, all combined together to create a set of circumstances in which we suggest you can be sure that it was Lucy Letby who sabotaged child I on this occasion.